There are objects in this world that feel ordinary, until the moment you realize they're not. This is the story of a mirror. Not just any mirror, but one that would eventually change everything. It was a quiet afternoon when it was first purchased. A simple thrift store. Dust-covered shelves. Old furniture stacked in corners. The kind of place where forgotten things are given a second chance. Or perhaps, a second purpose. The mirror stood out immediately. Not because of its beauty, but because of its presence. A large antique mirror with a worn wooden frame. Its surface wasn't perfectly clean, but something about it made it feel alive. The buyer didn't think much of it at the time. Just another decorative piece. Something to fill an empty wall. Something to reflect a room. Nothing more. It was taken home. Placed in a quiet room. A space that had seen little use. The lighting was soft. The walls were plain. And for the first few hours, everything seemed perfectly normal. The mirror did what mirrors are supposed to do. It reflected. It showed the room. It showed movement. It showed reality. But there was one small detail that went unnoticed at first. It began subtly, almost imperceptibly. A moment of hesitation. A fraction of a second. A delay. Not between the person and the reflection, but between the action, and the reflection's reaction. At first, it was dismissed. A trick of the mind. Fatigue. Lighting. Anything but what it appeared to be. But then, it happened again. The reflection moved. Just slightly. Out of sync. Not delayed. Not lagging behind. But behaving as if it knew what was coming next. And then came the moment that changed everything. Late that night. The room was silent. Darkness filled the space. Only a faint light remained. The figure stood in front of the mirror. Still. Observing. Trying to understand what was happening. And then, the reflection moved. Not in the way it should have. It turned its head. Slowly. Deliberately. But the person in front of the mirror did not. For a brief moment, there was a disconnect between reality and the reflection. And then, the reflection did something impossible. It looked away, as if something behind the person had caught its attention. But there was nothing behind them. Only silence. Only darkness. And then, the reflection slowly turned back. Its expression had changed. Subtle, but undeniable. It no longer looked like a reflection. It looked aware. The person stepped closer, trying to understand, trying to prove it wrong. And as they approached, something even stranger happened. The reflection stopped moving. Completely. As if waiting. Watching. Then, without warning, it raised its hand and placed it against the glass. The person froze, because for the first time, the reflection was no longer mimicking. It was acting. And then, it mouthed something. No sound. No voice. But the words were clear. Don't trust your memories. The moment lingered. Frozen in time. Unnatural. Unsettling. What begins as a strange anomaly often evolves into something far more dangerous. Something that doesn't just disturb reality, but begins to reshape it. After the first encounter, nothing seemed immediately wrong. The mirror stood quietly. Still. Silent. Unremarkable. But something had already begun to shift. Because the next time the mirror was approached, it didn't behave the same. The reflection appeared normal at first. A perfect match. Same posture. Same environment. Same lighting. But then, a detail appeared. Subtle. Almost invisible. The reflection was no longer in the same room. The person stood in their space. But the reflection, it was somewhere else. A different room. Dimly lit. Unknown. Unfamiliar. At first, it felt impossible to process. The brain resisted the idea. Searching for explanations. Looking for logic. But none existed. Because the reflection was not just delayed. Was not just distorted. It was existing in another version of reality. And it was aware of the person watching. The reflection's eyes moved first. Slow. Intentional. It looked directly at the person. not like a reflection would, but like someone who had been waiting. Then, the reflection moved closer to the glass, pressing its hand against the surface. And for a moment, it felt as though the mirror wasn't just reflecting anymore, but connecting. A thin boundary, separating two realities. The person instinctively stepped back, but the reflection didn't follow. Instead, it did something far more disturbing. It smiled, not in a natural way, not a friendly expression, but something controlled, something deliberate. And then, the reflection mouthed words again, this time slower, clearer, more deliberate. You're remembering it wrong. The sentence lingered, heavy, uncomfortable, because it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a correction, as if the reflection was not speaking to the present, but to something deeper, something hidden. The next morning, everything appeared normal, but something subtle had changed. A small inconsistency, a memory. The person tried to recall what had happened the night before, the reflection, the words, the strange feeling, but the details felt unstable, unreliable, like they were slipping away. The more they tried to remember, the more it faded, as if something was actively removing it or rewriting it. By the time the day had passed, the memory felt distant, almost like a dream. And that's when the second shift began. The mirror didn't just distort reality anymore. It began affecting perception. Subtly, slowly, quietly. At first, it was small things. A misplaced object. A moment of confusion. A feeling that something was different, even when nothing appeared to have changed. But the changes were happening. In places the eye couldn't immediately detect. In details the mind struggled to hold on to. And most dangerously, there is a point in every disturbance where things stop being strange and start becoming unstable. By this stage, the changes were no longer subtle. They were accumulating, layer by layer, moment by moment. And the most dangerous part? They were happening in ways that could not be easily noticed. At first, it was small, a misplaced object, something you're certain you left on the table, but now rests somewhere else, not moved violently, not obviously tampered with, just incorrect. Then came the conversations, fragments of dialogue that felt familiar, but not entirely accurate. You would remember speaking to someone, but when recalling the exact words, they wouldn't align with what was actually said. And the more you tried to fix it, the less certain you became, until eventually, you stopped trusting your own memory. And that's when the mirror's influence deepened. Because now, it wasn't just showing something else. It was starting to overwrite what was real. At night, when the room was quiet, the mirror became active again. But something had changed. The reflection no longer appeared uncertain, no longer distant. It felt present, more present than before. And this time, the reflection wasn't standing still. It was moving, but not randomly. It was repeating actions, actions that felt familiar, as if it was replaying something that had already happened. But here's where it became terrifying, because while the reflection moved, the person watching began to feel something strange, a sense of déjà vu, not the usual kind, but something deeper, something heavier, like they were remembering something they had never actually experienced. And then, the realization began to form, slowly, uncomfortably. The reflection wasn't showing the present. It was showing a version of the past, but not just any past, a past that no longer matched reality, a past that had been altered, or rewritten. And now, the reflection was correcting it. The next moment changed everything, because the reflection stopped, mid-motion, completely still. And then, it looked directly at the viewer, not as before, not distant, but focused, intent. And this time, the message was clearer, more urgent. You're forgetting. The words weren't just spoken. They felt injected, like they were entering the mind directly. And suddenly, everything began to feel unstable. The room, the lighting, even the sense of self because a terrifying realization was forming. If memories can be changed, then what guarantees that anything you remember is real? The person looked away from the mirror, trying to break the connection, trying to reset their thoughts, but something lingered. A pressure, a presence, as if the mirror was still watching, even when it wasn't visible. Then came the worst part, the moment that shattered certainty completely, because when they looked back, the reflection wasn't the same. It was smiling, but not in the way it had before. At this point, something fundamental had already begun to break. Not the mirror, not the room, but something far more dangerous. The ability to trust memory. The first signs. It starts small, almost unnoticeable. You place something down, walk away, then return, and something feels off. The object is still there, but you don't remember placing it exactly that way. At first, it feels like nothing, just a moment of forgetfulness. But then it happens again, and again, and again, until you start asking a dangerous question. What if my memory isn't reliable? The growing disturbance. The changes don't happen loudly. They don't happen all at once. Instead, they accumulate. A sentence you're certain was said, was never spoken. A conversation you clearly remember, did not happen the way you recall. And the worst part? There is no way to prove otherwise, because every attempt to confirm the truth only makes things more confusing. The mirror evolves. That night, the mirror feels different. Not visually, not obviously, but present. The reflection appears as usual. But this time, it doesn't move immediately. It waits, just a fraction longer than it should. Then it moves. But something is off. The timing is wrong. Not delayed, but anticipatory, as if it already knows what's going to happen. The first real glitch. You raise your hand. The reflection doesn't just mirror it. It hesitates, just for a second. Then it follows. But the hesitation is enough, because now, you're no longer sure who is reacting, and who is initiating. The memory shift. Later that night, something strange happens. You try to recall something simple. What did you do earlier today? But the memory feels unstable. The more you try to focus, the more it changes. Details shift. Small inconsistencies appear, then disappear, then reappear differently, as if the memory itself is being edited, while you're trying to access it. Or the breaking point begins. You stand in front of the mirror again, staring, waiting, and this time, the reflection does something new. It doesn't copy your movement. It watches you, closely, carefully, as if evaluating something. Then, it smiles, but not a natural smile, a knowing smile, the kind that suggests understanding of something you don't yet realize. Ere the realization, a thought forms, slow, uncomfortable, impossible to ignore. What if the mirror isn't reflecting the present? What if it's correcting the past? And worse, what if your memories are what's being corrected? The truth begins to surface. You try to remember something specific, a moment, a conversation, but the details don't hold. Every time you focus, the memory shifts, not dramatically, but enough to break certainty. And that's when it becomes clear. Something is interfering, not just observing, actively altering. The mirror responds. You look into the mirror again, and the reflection is closer now, closer than it should. By now, there was no denying it anymore. Something was wrong, not with the room, not with the mirror, but with reality itself, and more importantly, with identity. Because once memory begins to collapse, there's only one question left. Who are you? Without it, the silence before the shift. The room felt heavier than usual that night. Not physically, but mentally. Like something was building, waiting, watching. The mirror stood exactly where it always had. Still, quiet. But now, it felt different. Not like an object, like a presence. The absence. When the mirror was approached, Something unexpected happened. There was no reflection. For a brief moment, the glass showed nothing. No movement. No figure. Just an empty room. That alone was enough to trigger fear, because even the distortion before still followed some kind of logic. But this broke it completely. Ere the emergence. Then, slowly, something began to appear. Not instantly. Not like a normal reflection. But gradually. Like it was forming. From somewhere deeper. And when it finally became clear, it looked familiar. Too familiar. Same face. Same posture. Same identity. But something was different. Subtle. But impossible to ignore. Ere the eyes. They weren't confused. They weren't reactive. Ere they were certain. Ere the first real contact. The figure in the mirror didn't wait. Didn't hesitate. Didn't mimic. It stepped forward. And placed its hand against the glass. And this time, ere the glass reacted, a slight ripple, a distortion, like the barrier between both sides, was no longer stable, ere the words that changed everything. And then, it spoke, clearly, directly, not like before, not as a warning, but as a fact. You don't remember what happened before this, do you? The sentence lingered, because deep down, there was a feeling, a gap, something missing, but impossible to define. Ere the realization, memories weren't just fading, they were incomplete, edited, controlled, and suddenly, a terrifying possibility emerged. A what if this wasn't the first time? A what if something had already happened, and been erased? Ere the truth begins, the reflection leaned closer, closer than ever before. And this time, its expression changed. Not threatening, not hostile, but knowing, as if it had already seen this moment, many times. And then it said something that shattered everything. That's how it always starts. Ere the loop, the words echoed in the mind. Always. Not once, not twice, ere always. Which meant, ere this wasn't new, ere this wasn't random. Ere this was a cycle. Ere the impossible statement. The reflection took a slow breath, then looked directly into the viewer's eyes, and said, "I'm not the reflection." A pause. Silence filled the room. And then, "You are." Or the breakdown. The statement didn't just confuse. It collapsed everything. Because if that was true, then nothing made sense anymore. Which side was real? Which side was original? Which version was correct? I don't remember when I stopped trusting mirrors, but I do remember the moment. I realized the mirror didn't need me anymore. It had been 3 days since I smashed it. 3 days since I burned every piece. 3 days since I told myself, it's over. And for a while, it actually felt like it was. No whispers, no memory gaps, no strange reflections, just silence, normal, peace. Until that night, I was sitting alone in my room, lights off, phone in my hand, scrolling, not really seeing anything. You know that feeling, when your brain is tired, but your body won't sleep. That kind of night. And then, my screen went black. Not off, just black, like a reflection. And for a split second, I saw my face, but it wasn't me. Same eyes. Same shape, same expression, but something was off. Something wrong. It was smiling. I wasn't. I froze. My fingers tightened around the phone. Slowly, carefully, I lifted it closer. And then, it spoke. Not out loud, not with sound, but I heard it anyway. Inside my head. Clear, sharp, cold. You didn't break it. My heart dropped. The screen flickered. And suddenly, I wasn't looking at my room anymore. I was looking at that room. The one from the mirror. Different walls. Different light. Different life. And in that reflection, I was there, standing still, looking directly at me. And then, he moved. Not like before. Not delayed. Not mirrored. Independent. He stepped closer, leaning toward the glass from his side, eyes locked on mine. And then he whispered, "You're the reflection now." The phone slipped from my hand, hit the floor, screen shattered. But I didn't look down. I couldn't, because something behind me moved. Slowly, I turned around. There was nothing, just my room. Dark, silent, empty. But then, I looked at the window, and my breath stopped, because in the reflection, I was still sitting, holding the phone, smiling, and behind that version of me, something stood, tall, still, watching. Its hand rested on my shoulder, and my reflection slowly turned its head toward it, and smiled wider. That was the last moment I remember clearly. They say I was found the next morning, sitting in the same spot, not moving, not speaking, just staring at nothing. Doctors called it trauma, severe dissociation, memory fracture. They asked me questions, simple ones. What's your name? Where are you? What happened? I couldn't answer, because every time I tried to remember, I heard that voice again. Don't trust your memories. They discharged me a week later, said I'd recover, said it would pass, but they were wrong, because even now, sometimes, when I look at my reflection, it doesn't blink when I blink, and sometimes, it smiles before I do. And last night, it finally spoke again, not in my head. This time, I heard it, soft, right behind me. It's almost time to switch. So if you ever buy something old, something with a history, something that looks normal, just remember this. Some objects don't belong to you.